Sage froze in the kitchen doorway, gripping the frame so tightly that her nails dug into the old paint. Dexter, her husband, stood by the stove, stirring something in a pot. The aroma of tomato sauce and garlic filled the air, but it didn't comfort her. Something felt off. His movements were too sharp, too focused, tense in a way she hadn't seen before. Then she saw it. A quick, almost imperceptible motion, he sprinkled something from a small packet into a plate. Her plate. Her heart pounded, echoing in her temples. She didn't scream or confront him. Instead, she quietly stepped back into the hallway's shadows, holding her breath. Dexter hadn't noticed her. He turned to the sink, rinsed the powder from his fingers, then calmly placed the plates on the table, one for her, one for himself. Sage realized she had to act quickly. "Dinner's ready," Dexter called, not looking back. His voice was steady, but after all these years, she could hear the false note in it. "Coming," she replied, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. She walked into the kitchen, forced a smile, and sat down. Dexter watched her, waiting for her to take the first bite. She picked up her fork, turned it in her hands, and then, as if by accident, nudged her plate toward him and pulled his closer. "Oops, sorry," she said with a light laugh. "Let's switch." "I don't mind." His face flickered. For a split second, fear flashed in his eyes, but then he pulled himself together. "Sure," he muttered and started eating. Sage watched every bite. Every swallow. And waited. It had started with something small. 3 weeks earlier, Sage had come home from work, exhausted, her feet throbbing, and simply asked Dexter to wash a dinner plate. He scoffed, threw his fork on the table, and stormed off into the living room to turn on the TV. It wasn't the first time, but something inside her snapped that evening. She yelled after him that she wasn't going to be his maid. He snapped back, called her hysterical. From then on, the rift between them only deepened. Dexter had never been an ideal husband. Scattered socks. Empty beer bottles piling up on the coffee table. The habit of disappearing to his mother's without warning. Sage had learned to live with it. But in recent months, he'd changed. He'd grown colder. More calculating. She saw how he avoided her gaze, how his voice quivered when he lied about where he'd been. And then she told him about the money. That was her mistake. It had been a secret account, opened by her parents when she was young, meant for college or something important later in life. Sage had been adding to it for years, dreaming of a place of her own, or one day giving her future children a solid start. She had no intention of wasting it. But when she mentioned it to Dexter, hoping he would see it as something they could build their future on together, his face twisted with anger. "You don't trust me," he barked. "Keeping secret stashes while I'm out here busting my ass. It's not a stash. It's for us. For the future," she tried to explain, but he was no longer listening. He grabbed his coat and slammed the door on his way to his mother's. The glass in the windows trembled. He came back 2 days later, silent and grim, but Sage felt it, something fundamental had shifted. The way he looked at her had changed. He saw her now not as a partner, but as a problem. She remembered how they met, 3 years ago. Her friend Chloe had dragged her to a loud, sweaty nightclub, looking for a guy who had ghosted her after a fight. Sage hated the noise and the crowds but agreed to come. They were pushing through the mass of bodies when Chloe, waving her arms, accidentally elbowed a man in the face. He turned, rubbing his cheek, and Sage froze, expecting a scene. But instead, he laughed, loudly and genuinely. His name was Dexter. Tall, dark-haired, with a bit of stubble. He had a magnetic smile and a quick wit. "Are you her bodyguard?" he asked Sage, grinning. "Nope. Just a hostage of circumstance," she replied. He laughed again. By the end of the night, he'd asked her out. She gave him her number, not expecting much. But he called the very next day. The first few months felt like a movie. He took her out for coffee, gave her flowers, told stories about his job at the auto shop. Sage saw someone who wanted more out of life. They moved in together after 6 months. A year later, he proposed, no diamonds, no ceremony. Just dinner at home and a quiet, "Marry me?" She said yes. She believed in what they could build. Reality crept in like a cold draft through the cracks of their old apartment, shattering the fragile illusion of a happy marriage. The man who once seemed full of dreams quickly revealed his true face. Dexter grew lazier with every passing day. His socks lay abandoned in corners, empty beer bottles piled up like monuments to apathy, and the sink full of dishes became a silent accusation against her patience. At first, Sage blamed exhaustion. He came home from the garage with oil-stained hands and a heavy gaze, complaining about a paycheck that barely covered gas for their rusty old Honda. She endured it, telling herself it was temporary. That he would bounce back soon. But the days dragged on, and his laziness thickened like dust in their cramped apartment. Then came the disappearances. He would vanish to his mother's for the weekend without a word, leaving her alone with the hum of the television and a cold bed. When he returned, he said nothing, face sour, hands empty, as though her anxiety wasn't worth addressing. Sage tried to reach him. She begged him to at least send a quick text, "At Mom's, back Sunday." He'd wave her off with a barbed reply, "What are you, my warden?" His words cut like glass. And she began to suspect something more was going on. Maybe debts, he'd hinted that his salary barely covered their groceries. Maybe another woman, she'd found crumpled bar receipts from places he never mentioned. No solid proof. Just shadows of suspicion growing like mold on the damp walls of their home. Things got worse after the money conversation. Her savings account, her secret pride, had been built over years of small sacrifices, skipping vacations, ignoring new shoes, working overtime in an office that smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. That money was her backup plan, her dream of a home, a future where she didn't have to count every cent. She had told Dexter about it in a moment of trust, hoping he'd be proud. That he'd see it as their shared opportunity. But instead, his face contorted as if she had punched him. "You don't trust me?" he shouted, hurling a beer bottle at the wall. It exploded into glass and foam, soaking the wallpaper. "I work my ass off for scraps, lugging metal around until my hands bleed, and you're sitting on a mountain of cash." "It's not a mountain, Dexter," she said, heart racing but voice steady. "It's for us. For the future. For the kids, if we ever have any." "Future?" He stepped toward her, eyes gleaming with something dangerous. "What future, Sage? I'm drowning every damn day and you're sitting there like some queen on her throne. Do you even know how worthless I feel, that I can't give you anything?" That night he stormed out again, back to his mother's. Sage stood in the center of the living room, staring at the shattered bottle, feeling like her hopes had broken with it. He came back 2 days later. Brooding, bloodshot, and reeking of stale alcohol. But something in him had snapped. His gaze had changed, colder, more calculating. Like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. From then on, Dexter was different. He didn't yell anymore. He didn't throw things. He started to manipulate instead, slowly, subtly, like poison dropped into water. His meager salary became both excuse and leverage. He drifted around their apartment hunched over, sighing heavily, muttering phrases that made Sage's hands go cold. "We need a new car, Sage," he said one night from the couch, a beer bottle in hand. "Not that rusty coffin. I'm late to work every day because it stalls. They'll fire me soon." "Then what?" "We can't touch the savings," she replied, fists clenched beneath the table. "That's not what it's for." "Not what it's for," he echoed with a bitter laugh. "What's it for, huh? So you can sit back and watch me rot? I'm working for us, and you won't lift a damn finger to help me." The next morning, he tried a different approach. As Sage was making coffee, he came up behind her and gently placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Wouldn't it be nice to go somewhere?" he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Just for a week. I'm losing my mind at work. If we had the money, I'd rest, come back stronger. But if I keep going like this, Sage, I'm gonna break. Is that what you want?" She stepped away, feeling his words prick her skin like needles. Sage knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't want the money for them. He wanted it for himself. That account was her shield. Her last defense. Her hope for independence. And she wasn't going to give it up. But every time she said no, it lit a new spark of resentment in his eyes. Dexter was angry, but not openly like before. Now it was quiet, seething, hidden like a snake under a rock. He stopped talking to her. Answered questions with grunts. Ignored her when she asked where he'd been or why he was late. He started sleeping on the couch, leaving her alone in their bed with the cold weight of silence and empty sheets. It was his form of protest. His silent war. His way of breaking her down without ever raising his voice. Inside her, something began to boil. Rage and fear battled for control. She gritted her teeth and held on, but the pressure was building, storm clouds gathering. One evening, she snapped. They stood in the living room, surrounded by the usual clutter, empty bottles, cigarette butts, crumpled newspapers. Dexter sat on the couch, staring at the TV where some sports commentator was yelling into a microphone. Sage stepped forward, her voice shaking with repressed pain. "You're selfish, Dexter," she said, the words firing like a bullet. "You don't care about me. Or us. All you care about is yourself, your wants. I'm just a wallet to you, aren't I?" He turned to look at her, slow and cold. His eyes were like sheets of ice. "You think you're better than me?" he hissed. "Sitting on your damn savings like a dragon on a treasure hoard while I choke out there. I'm breaking my back for scraps, Sage. And you? You won't even twitch a finger to help. Maybe you're the selfish one. Maybe you hate me." His words hit like a slap. Sage gasped for air, feeling tears sting her eyes. But she didn't let them fall. She turned on her heel and slammed the bedroom door behind her so hard the frame shuddered. Inside, she leaned against the wall, breath coming fast. And for the first time in years, one clear thought cut through the noise: I can't live like this anymore. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, its cracks stretching like a map of her broken life. And she realized that their marriage wasn't a partnership, it was a prison. And she needed out. She got up the next morning like always, made the coffee like always. And watched as Dexter ate from the plate she had swapped. He didn't know. Sage poked at her food, pretending to eat. And watched him closely. 5 minutes passed. 10. His motion slowed. His fork shook slightly in his hand. He blinked hard. Rubbed his eyes, like trying to shake off drowsiness. "You okay?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just tired," he mumbled. His voice was sluggish. His words slurred together. He set down the fork and leaned forward onto the table, burying his face in his hands. Then, his head began to droop. Sage rose silently, never taking her eyes off him. He wasn't faking. Whatever he'd put in her food, it was working on him now. She grabbed the phone and dialed 911. "Please come quickly," she told the dispatcher, trying not to scream. "My husband, he put something in the food, and now he's not well." She watched him as she waited. He was slumped over the table, breathing heavily. Sage didn't feel pity. Only fear. And cold, burning rage. What had he planned? Poison her? Sedate her? Why? The police arrived 15 minutes later. They took him into custody, called an ambulance, and told her not to touch anything. Later, the lab results confirmed it. The plate contained a heavy sedative, enough to keep her unconscious for an entire day. Or worse. If she had a weak heart or an allergy, she might never have woken up. They asked if she wanted to press charges. She said yes. The next morning, after that fateful night, Sage stood at her front door with a brand new set of locks in her hands. Her fingers trembled as the locksmith dismantled the old mechanism, the one that had let Dexter come and go with his lies and threats for so long. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were red from crying and exhaustion. But in her chest burned something cold and bright, resolve. When the lock clicked into place, sealing her past on the other side of the door, she exhaled, for the first time in months, without fear. Dexter had been released under a travel restriction. That same evening, he showed up at the apartment, swaying, reeking of booze, a crazed look in his eyes. He pounded on the door with his fists, leaving muddy smears on the chipped paint, yelling over the roar of the rain outside. "Open up, Sage. This is my house. You can't kick me out, you hear me?" His voice cracked into a hoarse scream, laced with fury and desperation. "I did everything for you, and you betrayed me." Sage stood on the other side of the door, back pressed to the wall, listening as his rage blended with the howling wind. Her heart thudded, but she didn't move. She whispered into the phone again, "Come quickly." When the sirens split the night air, Dexter fell silent. Then his footsteps faded into the darkness. It was the last time she saw his shadow on her doorstep. He disappeared. The neighbors whispered that he had gone back to his mother's crumbling house on the edge of town, the one with wind howling through the cracks and a leaky roof that gave in during heavy rain. But rumors about him still reached Sage, like fragments of a bad dream. People said he had lost his job at the auto shop, fired for showing up drunk and wrecking a customer's car. That he'd started begging acquaintances for money. Wandering through bars where he was known as a drunk and a troublemaker. One night, he picked a fight with a bouncer and ended up with a broken nose and a reputation as a loser. Even his mother, old and frail, began kicking him out. But like a stray dog, he always came back, until one day, he didn't. Someone claimed to have seen him near the bus terminal, wearing a tattered jacket, clutching a bottle of cheap alcohol, muttering curses into the air. Dexter, once full of ambition and fury, had fallen to rock bottom, where his manipulation and lies could no longer trap anyone. But Sage had escaped. She used the savings account, her hard-earned shield, to buy a small apartment on a quiet street. One room. Faded wallpaper. A kitchen with worn-out linoleum. But it was hers. She registered the apartment in her mother's name so that Dexter couldn't touch it, not even through court. That move saved her. She carried the boxes through the rain, feeling the water wash years of suffocation from her skin. For the first time in what felt like forever, she took a deep breath, standing by the window of her new home, where the sound of wet leaves replaced the shouting of her husband. 3 years passed. Sage's life blossomed, like a flower that had forced its way through asphalt. She met Andreas, a man with a soft voice and warm hands. A man who didn't leave dirty dishes in the sink. Who didn't disappear without a word. He worked as an engineer and earned enough that they could enjoy life's small joys, dinner at a cafe, walks in the park. When their son was born, Sage looked into his tiny face and felt the last shards of her old life melt away. They had a quiet wedding at City Hall. The building smelled of old paper and fresh flowers. As she stood there with a ring on her finger, she suddenly remembered Dexter, his cold, empty eyes. That night in the kitchen. The plate. But the memory was distant now, just an echo from another life, drowned out by her son's laughter and Andreas's gentle whisper, "I'm here." Somewhere out there, they said, Dexter still roamed the damp, grim streets. Hunched over. Wrinkled by despair. His once strong hands now trembling around a bottle. His voice, once full of venom and threats, had shriveled into meaningless muttering. He had become a ghost of his former self. A man devoured by his own hatred and greed, leaving behind nothing but a shell, sinking deeper into filth and oblivion. Sage didn't know if he was still alive. And she didn't want to. Her world now was filled with light.